Congressman, thanks once again. We really appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thanks, JT.
So, I guess just to fill you in on what was going on yesterday, we were talking about the war in Afghanistan, and I have to apologize ahead of time if some of what I say sounds a little uneducated. Some of it, it's just a point of view from just a regular old American. So, some of the things that we were talking about yesterday were the fact that a lot of American people, and since I talked yesterday, I've gotten a lot of emails, I've gotten a lot of phone calls about this, and folks that sort of agree and side with me, and believe me, if they didn't, they'd let me know as well. But it seems to me that both of the wars, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, it doesn't seem like there's really any point to us being there any longer.
Yeah, I think the public should be asking the questions that you're asking. We have had 7 years of a long war, and we're still there. I was on the ground, as you know, JT, very early in that war. I headed the Navy Sanitarian Unit and was sent in for a short mission, and then came back part of the retaliatory strike I commanded. My perspective is also the one of having served in the White House for President Clinton and watching the deliberateness that he and I now watch appropriately. I think he's doing it. President Obama look towards this weak hand he was dealt. Here's what I believe. The most chilling statement that has been made in the last few years about the Afghanistan-Pakistan issue was when General Hayden, who was then head of the CIA, said a few years ago, Al-Qaeda, the Al-Qaeda who planned 9/11, has a safe haven in Pakistan. They have that because we shifted our resources and our attention to that tragic misadventure in Iraq. And what we were winning, we then no longer were winning, which was the extermination of Al-Qaeda, not permitting a safe haven in that region. That's very hard to get to, even physically, as well as even picking up hints from our satellites. And third, it never permitted the other elements of international national power, the rule of law, the rule of education, or the ability to have educated workforce to take root, so a society would not want to have Al-Qaeda back there. But here's what I think we have to think thoroughly through. 5-6 years from now, if we leave there with that safe haven still there, will another 9/11 occur? So I believe that our goal is no longer Afghanistan. It is solely the extermination of that safe haven that has now exists on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Actually, it's on the Pakistani side. That's why this Waziristan offensive by Pakistan is so important to our security. I believe we may, and I will support a measured increase in troops under the following two conditions, in addition to that goal being the extermination of Al-Qaeda. The other two are we must have a set of benchmarks that the public can see, measure success or failure, and will trigger an exit strategy if we are not being successful to a different approach, which would be a containment strategy, less viable, but nevertheless, if the other one isn't working, it can't be an open-ended commitment because the cost is too much. And third, that we recognize that our goal is no longer a representative democracy through nation building in Afghanistan or that region. It's one of leaving behind an area, a region that's inhospitable to Al-Qaeda coming back. That's why I'm supportive, as long as there is a measurement by which we can see if our increased commitment is beginning to take root in success. We've never had that approach, and without that, I could not support an increase. But I do believe that exterminating that safe haven is important, vitally important to our interest.
Well, Congressman Sestak, let me first, I'll explain to you my concern, and then what I would do if I were president, if you'll allow me.
Absolutely.
Okay. First of all, I guess one of the biggest concerns is the enemy that we are fighting. It's not necessarily an army that we're fighting. There is not one top person that is going to eventually say, okay, everybody, cease fire. the Americans win. It always seems like there is going to be someone in back of whomever we take out that will continue to hate us for our beliefs, for the fact that we're going onto into their holy land, on their holy territory, and fighting them. There's always going to be people waiting right in back. To a lot of folks, it seems as though there's no way out of it, because there isn't an actual army or an actual force. We're fighting over beliefs. We're not really fighting so much over territory. So, I mean, that's a big concern. I mean, it doesn't. I don't know that it seems as though, to me and to just the person that's not fighting on the front lines, it doesn't seem like we're actually fighting a face. We're just fighting sort of a belief. It would almost be as though, we were driving in tanks down High Street here in Westchester, and there were people who just randomly didn't like you and were shooting rocket-propelled grenades at you. You kill them while there's people in back of them that don't like you. It just keeps happening. It sort of perpetuates itself.
It's a very good point. We are not fighting a face. That's why this change of General McChrystal's to a counterinsurgency approach from a counterterrorist approach is the key strategy. Counterterrorist approach is seek out and kill. Counterinsurgency approach is, look, let the people know we're there for them, that there is trust that we want to have from them to us. We are as interested in their livelihood and safety as we are in ours. And that is important, because it is the hearts and minds that eventually will change, that have to change for us to win the global war of terror. And I say that, though, with something else. Admiral Blair, head of the Director of Central Intelligence, said in January that the gravest danger to America's security is the economic downturn and the lack of economic opportunity around the world. In Tajikistan, for example, hundreds of thousands of Tajiks, young Muslim men, went to Russia over the past decade to work in their oil fields. They got a livelihood there, sent their money home. They've all been returned home because there's no work anymore. They've come home penniless, not enough to get married, but on the other side of the border is Afghanistan and a Tajik warlord who offers them, as part of the Taliban, a wage that's 3.5 times what an Afghan policeman gets. And that's a large wage in Afghanistan. It's middle class. And so what we find is, of the Taliban, there's 20,000 of them in Afghanistan. About 70% are not there for ideology. They're there for a wage, literally a wage. So our adversary is an ideology, you might say, but the adherents to it, or those that join, often do it for reasons that don't have to do with the ideology, but they have nowhere else to turn for an economic opportunity. That's why, as we have to recognize that counterinsurgency strategy isn't seek and kill. Yes, there's 6,000 of the 20,000 that are hardcore Taliban that we would like to neutralize. But the others is, how do you buy them off? Literally, enough that they have enough say in the local future of that economy, of that place, that they don't want to be aligned with somebody they don't really care that much about. It's just that they were paying them a wage. What's the alternative? And that's why it's important that militaries don't fix problems. We may stop a problem, but to fix it, it takes other elements of our power. So when I was on the ground early in the war, we were doing well. I saw it because our military was given an edifice of security by which the elements of power having to do from the international community and us, of giving them an economy they might then give them a living wage, to give them the rule of to give them education, that would have left a society that wasn't hospitable to al-Qaeda coming back. Now we have a bunch of warlords still there and tribal chiefs, and we should accept that and not try to have the central government be all it can be. It's not going to become a representative democracy, but maybe with the warlords and others, we can give them a buy-in to an economy, an economic prowess, something that doesn't align them with al-Qaeda. That's why this is not bullet against bullet. This is really some bullets, yes, but we have to leave behind a society that is not hospitable to al-Qaeda, and that gets to not a face, that gets to some buy-in that of the economy or their power locally, and that's kind of the change we're trying to bring about by this strategy.
Well, before I tell, and I know you don't have very much more time, but before I tell you what I would do, I ask you on behalf of a lot of people, not just myself, but why is that necessarily our job to do that?
You're right. We do this for only one reason, or should do it for one reason, and the Constitution lays it out, the security of America. And that is a judgment that needs to be made. We somehow, before 9/11, always liked away games, and were successful at that. We liked our wars over there. We didn't want a home game to where we would be struck here and have a war, so to speak, at here. But 9/11 happened, and we got struck. So a judgment needs to be made of, do we leave Al-Qaeda, the Al-Qaeda who actually, the leadership who planned that 9/11, a safe haven, and depart that region where they can plan against us? Or is there an alternative means to stop them from doing it? My assessment is it's in our interest to be there for one reason. As I began the conversation, I don't want Al-Qaeda to have a safe haven where they're undisturbed, that they can plan against us. That's in our interest. Now, we can't leave a society in Afghanistan that's a representative democracy and all that, but we might be able to leave it behind where it's inhospitable, as I mentioned, to Al-Qaeda, but it isn't. It's so that in the future Al-Qaeda won't have a safe haven and we don't have to come back. I think that's in our interest, but only if I can have from the administration, or we can have benchmarks that measure if we're being successful. We never had that in Afghanistan. It was an open-ended commitment. I'm not for that. There's an alternative strategy, which is containment, come back in if we see them and pick them up. But right now I think it's in our interest, in a last opportunity to see if we can help with Pakistan on the other side of the border, covertly shutting the door to the Taliban that are in Pakistan, Waziristan, and have them do the counterinsurgency work, the counterterrorist work on the other side, and in conjunction leave there with no safe haven for Al-Qaeda. And that, to me, is most important. If I could, one story is when I went on the ground early in the war, I talked with General Hayden, who was head of the National Security Agency, the eavesdropping group that listens with satellites to Al-Qaeda. He told me when I went in, he said, Joe, General Franks, who was running the war, keeps telling me being General Hayden, give me some actionable intelligence. That is, intelligence I can act on so I can get Al-Qaeda. I keep telling General Franks, General Hayden said, give me some action, and I'll give you some intelligence. In short, if somebody isn't moving, they have a safe haven where they can communicate at a time and a place of their choosing, not to where we disturb them and they're like ants and go about frenzy and we can pick them up for communications and then get them. If we just leave a safe haven, we are leaving something to plan against us. Now, that doesn't mean it's an open-ended commitment, but that's why I wanted to stress, if that's our goal, and there's only 20,000 Taliban and 70% are there for a job, and we're not going to try to nation build, but leave behind some probability Al-Qaeda won't come back, and we can measure success or failures over a few years, it may be, I believe it's a better strategy than now redeploying and saying, well, trying to contain them and try to come back in if Al-Qaeda does begin to expose itself, and now I've picked them up, let me go back in and get them. And it's a judgment that needs to be made, but my experience leads me to this not wonderful but yet necessary effort, I think, to try, as long as we have an exit strategy ready.
Well, let me just briefly tell you what I would do, and then you can tell me why this would probably be dangerous to do, and you know the outcome would not be positive, I guess, for us. Why is it not possible to essentially, I mean, the number that I have is that it costs more than $12 billion a month to wage the war in Iraq. And I'm sure it costs, even more, factored in Afghanistan, everything of that nature. Why would it not be possible to just pull everybody sort of out and protect ourselves from the inside? I mean, fortify our borders from the inside. Take this money that is being spent on these wars and put it back into programs for seniors, people without health care, so many of the other things that are lacking in our country, and protect ourselves from the inside, use intelligence. I mean, it seems as though we're doing a good enough job protecting ourselves here and thwarting terrorism here right now, especially after 9/11. There's been a heightened sense of safety, and people have been, a lot more on the ball than they were before, seemingly. So why couldn't we just protect ourselves from the inside and sort of take a stand that a lot of other countries do and just say, look, we're going to protect our own, but we're going to do it, as we said, playing, in your words, more of a home game?
Yeah, two important points you brought up. First, I agree with you that true national security does begin at home, in our health security, our economic security, our education security. I saw it all the time in the U.S. military when I was in it for those 31 years. Give me a healthy youth that's educated, and I'll give you a strong defense. It's not the machines of war. It's the wonderful, healthy youth, the educated youth we have. And we need to do exactly. It's the only reason I came to Congress, because my daughter had brain cancer, and I wanted everyone to have health care opportunities she did. We lose $260 billion a year in lost economic productivity because of the under- and uninsured. This is an economic issue as well as just we want our people to be healthy and live longer. So I agree with you on that, and that's part of trying to come down and change the priorities here in Washington, D.C. towards that. But unfortunately, the last president, instead of finishing the job in Afghanistan, I mean, the military should never divide forces, took us to that tragic war in Iraq, which I believe we would have been out of Afghanistan by now if it wasn't for that. What I do believe is, though, while we do want to have a strong homeland defense, you can see how hard it is with some recent arrest that I do believe that we will be more efficient and cost-effective if we are trying to stop the threat overseas rather than waiting to see if we're picking them up as they're crossing our border. And I know that's not exactly what you meant. Look, if we cannot, in the next few years, actually begin to have true success in what I said, then I have to agree with your approach, because it's not worth the enormous cost that if we have to keep doing this for years after years after years, then we have to think of an alternative containment strategy. But I believe that we know where they are generally. We have the Pakistanis beginning with us on the other side doing a pincer movement, so to speak. But it is going to be intelligence, as you said, but intelligence that doesn't let them sit safely around. We know the leadership of al-Qaeda sits there. And I think we have to give this effort, along with Pakistan, because I do think we're allied with her in this effort, finally, of trying to exterminate the al-Qaeda. Look, you have to make your judgment. I don't like how we let this war spiral downward. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said 2 years ago, this coming December, that in Iraq we do what we must. In Afghanistan we do what we can. Because of that approach by the administration, we didn't put the sufficient focus and resources into preventing Afghanistan from spiraling so far southward that now it takes more effort to bring it up. But I think it is necessary, as long as we have benchmarks for success or failure that trigger an exit to an alternative strategy before the cost becomes way exorbitant over an alternative strategy to try to exterminate those who plan. It's better to get them then than it is as they begin to cross our border.
So in your estimation, Congressman, finally, it will be possible, it should be possible to be proactive and to wipe this out at the source then?
The key to me eventually is, as I said, military stop a problem. They don't fix it. If we had an ability to have done Afghanistan right instead of going to Iraq and had put money into education, for example, where 98% of all women in Afghanistan are illiterate, one of the long-term efforts to win is going to have to be non-military. It is. You just don't want people turning to the wrong ideology. So I am not one that believes the military will win this war by itself. We will win this war eventually when economic opportunity provides itself something to people over there that have no alternative choice. And so, but I do believe that in the meantime there are those who are planning harm against us. If we know where they are and they are planning damage against the United States, and they are the ones who've already done it, we should use a focused effort to neutralize them. In the meantime, if we had not gone to Iraq, I'm a firm believer, because I was on the ground there. I saw what we were doing and doing it well. And then I went back 18 months later on the ground, and I saw after Iraq we went there that we had shifted our resources away from it. We now, however, have to make a tough decision. Do we neutralize those elements that we know are there and then give the society some probability not to welcome them back, or do we come back here and basically build barricades and wait and see with good intelligence if we can catch them as they come here? I think that we should leave one last opportunity, knowing they're there, to exterminate them at the head. It doesn't mean there aren't elements around the world, but we know the very key leadership is there, and that's why as long as there is an exit strategy that's triggered by that it's not working, then I believe we should try this.
Congressman, and real quick, I hate to end interviews on a downer, and not necessarily that what we've been talking about is a downer, but and I appreciate you giving us all the time that you have on this. Have you made any crazy bets with anybody in Congress about the Phillies winning the World Series? It seems to be running rampant in Congress that, Congressman Bob Brady was saying he was, trying to get someone to bet him to shave his head, and
No, look, I haven't made any. I'm positive the Phillies are going to win. I have been a fan since Connie Mack Stadium when I went there with my grandfather and father, and I'll never forget it. Sunday afternoon, doubleheader, and I sat there. I was such a young kid at the time in the 50s, and I can remember mustard on my hot dog, and I won't have any hot dog anymore unless it only has mustard.
All right.
No, this is a great night last night, and another one coming, and look, these are serious questions we have over there, but at the end of the day, even as much as baseball is part of our character, so questioning what's the right approach to our future is a part of, and should be part of the American character. I just am very appreciative of the opportunity, because I believe as a public official, I owe it to people, let them know where I stand. I don't want them to say, well, I'm looking at this and looking at this. I owe it to do my homework, to let them know what I believe, to listen, like I wanted to listen to you, but to explain why here's where I'm sitting today, because I don't want to be the next senator of Pennsylvania who says, oh, well, I'm thinking. I want them to know what I'm thinking at the moment, not that I'm going to give it to them later. And I believe you can't just be responsible in a job. You need to be held accountable for what you believe in, and they have to tell people what it is. For better or for worse, I want to be someone where people can say, here's where he stands, but you can talk to him and he can learn, but at the same time you know where he stands, because that's principled accountability, and that's what I promise. So thanks, JT, for having me again.
Congressman Joe Sestak. Congressman, thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye now.